My name's Laura. I've been teaching Italian for a good part of my life, and at 42, I was pretty settled in my ways, comfortable, you might say, with the everyday hum of school bells and chalk dust. My life took a turn, though, not a dramatic one, but like when you catch someone's eye across a crowded room and just know something's going to happen. I met Marco on a typical soggy March afternoon. His daughter, Isabella, was one of my private students. A bright kid, always eager, always had her homework done on time. That day, she was scribbling away in her notebook when Marco first walked into my classroom to pick her up. "Sorry for barging in like this," he said, standing awkwardly at the door. His hair was a mess from the wind, and his coat was dripping all over the floor. "No worries at all. We're just wrapping up," I replied, giving him a reassuring smile. "Isabella's just finishing up an exercise." Marco nodded and leaned against the doorframe, watching us. "She talks a lot about you, says you make learning fun." I chuckled, closing my books. "I try. Italian is a beautiful language. It deserves a little passion, don't you think?" "Yeah, I guess," he shrugged, a small smile playing on his lips. "I'm Marco, by the way." "Laura," I said, extending my hand. Isabella packed her bag, chattering about the lesson and how she couldn't wait for the next one. Marco listened, his eyes flitting between her animated face and mine. It was clear he was a devoted dad. As they were about to leave, Marco paused. "Hey, if you're not busy this weekend, there's a little community gathering. Food, music, pretty laid back. Maybe you'd like to come? Bring some of that Italian passion to the party?" I was taken aback, not just by the invite but by the straightforwardness of it. "Sure, why not? Sounds like fun." "Great. It's a date then," he said, a bit too quickly. "I mean, not a date. Just, you know, a friendly outing." "Got it," I laughed, easing the awkwardness. "A friendly outing." At our first real outing, as the community band played some old tunes and kids ran around, Marco opened up a bit more over plates of food. "You know, I'm a widower," he said, his voice a bit lower, a bit rough around the edges. "Been raising Isabella and her brother Matteo on my own. He's 12, a real firecracker." I nodded, not sure what to say, my heart going out to him. "Sounds like you've got your hands full." "Yeah, it's been tough, but we manage," he replied, poking at his food. "They're good kids, they make it easier." Over the next few dates, our conversations deepened. We met at small cafes, walked through parks. It was during these walks that I met Matteo, a lively boy with his father's eyes and an infectious laugh. He took to me quickly, showing me his sketches and asking about Italy. Then, Marco introduced me to his mother. She was a stout woman with a sharp tongue but a warm smile. "So you're the lovely lady making my son smile again," she said, sizing me up, but not unkindly. "Glad he's found someone who can put up with his cooking." Becoming part of a new family wasn't something I planned meticulously, it sort of just happened, naturally unfolding as if it was meant to be. After Marco and I had been seeing each other for a while, things started to get serious. Before I knew it, I was not just his girlfriend, but a significant presence in his and his kids' lives. One Saturday morning, we decided it was time I moved in. Packing up my life into boxes felt strange, but right. Marco and the kids helped me move my stuff into their home, which was soon to become our home. "Hope you've got room for all these books," Marco joked as he lugged in yet another heavy box labeled books. "Better make room, or I'm building a library in the backyard," I shot back, laughing as we shuffled around the living room trying to figure out where everything would go. Matteo and Isabella seemed excited, each of them showing me their rooms and where I could maybe put some of my things. "You can put some stuff on my shelf if you want," Matteo offered, pointing to his cluttered bookshelf filled with model cars and old comic books. "Thanks, Matteo. Maybe I'll just add a couple of books, eh? Leave room for your cars," I replied, ruffling his hair. The real test came when I met Marco's mother, Rosa, under the new context of moving in. She came over that afternoon, her eyes scanning every move but her tone warm. "So, you're setting up shop here now, huh?" she asked as she watched me arrange the kitchen. "Yeah, Rosa, making it official," I answered, unsure how much territory I was allowed to mark as my own. "Well, just remember, Marco likes his eggs over easy, not scrambled," she pointed out bluntly, but with a twinkle in her eye. "I'll keep that in mind," I smiled, appreciating her mix of humor and directness. Living together meant adjusting, a lot of it. Marco worked long hours, and I found myself spending more time with Matteo and Isabella. I helped them with homework, we cooked meals together, and gradually, I wasn't just Laura anymore, I was a part of their daily routine. It wasn't all smooth sailing. There were days when I felt like I was stepping on toes, overstepping unseen boundaries. But for every awkward moment, there were a dozen others filled with laughter and shared secrets. We were finding our rhythm, slow and steady. Marco and I had our moments too, learning about each other in ways only possible when you share a space. "You know, you make this place better," Marco said one night as we sat on the couch, exhausted from the day. "I just want you guys to feel like it's still your home," I said, my head resting on his shoulder. Becoming a stepmom wasn't easy. There were no guidelines or rule books. But as I fell asleep that night, listening to the quiet hum of the house, I knew this was where I was meant to be. It was chaotic, messy, and absolutely perfect in its own imperfect way. In that moment, that was enough. Rosa and I used to have the best times together before the stroke changed everything. She'd come over and we'd spend hours in the kitchen, sharing recipes and gossiping like old friends. Those days filled the house with laughter and the warm aromas of Italian dishes we both loved to cook. But life, as it does, took a sharp turn. When Rosa was paralyzed, everything shifted. Marco moved her into our home, and naturally, I stepped up to take care of her. It seemed like the right thing to do, she was family, after all. However, Marco's help was strangely absent. I thought maybe he was just overwhelmed with work, but as days turned into weeks, his distance grew more noticeable. Caring for Rosa was a full-time job. She needed help with everything, and I did it all without a second thought, clinging to the warmth we once shared. But her condition seemed to harden her a bit, and our light chats turned into terse, functional conversations. "Did you add the basil to the sauce?" Rosa would ask sharply, watching me from her wheelchair as I cooked. "Yes, just like you taught me," I'd respond, trying to catch her eye and maybe spark a smile. But smiles were hard to come by those days. As time went on, Marco and I spoke less and less. One night, I tried to bridge the gap. "Marco, we hardly talk anymore. Is everything okay?" He was silent for a moment, then his words cut through the air. "I'm just tired, Laura. It's been a lot, dealing with everything." I nodded, feeling a chill. His eyes didn't meet mine. The disconnect between us was palpable, but I pushed it aside, focusing on Rosa and the kids. Years passed, and Rosa's presence in the house became the new normal until her death. It was sudden, despite everything, and the funeral was a blur of black dresses, somber faces, and whispered condolences. But the real shock came after the funeral, when Marco's true feelings spilled out during an argument. "You're just here taking up space now, Laura. I only put up with you because you were useful, but look at you, what use are you now?" His words were like slaps, leaving me stunned. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "Marco, how can you say that? After all these years?" "It's the truth, Laura. You were here for the kids and my mother, that's it." He turned away, dismissing me with a wave of his hand. The kids, now practically adults, started showing their true colors too. Isabella, once sweet and friendly, became cold and cruel. "You really have no one, Laura. You're just here because we pity you," she'd say, her words dripping with disdain. "Matteo wasn't any kinder. Why are you still hanging around? You're just taking up space," he'd sneer whenever we crossed paths in the hallway. Their words, their rejection, it gnawed at me daily. I felt isolated in the very home I had poured my heart into. The family I loved and cared for had turned against me, seeing me as nothing more than a temporary fixture, now obsolete. One evening, I was setting the dinner table, hoping for a quiet meal, when Marco walked in, his face like a storm cloud. "Why are you still trying to play happy families, Laura? You know it's all a show," he snapped as he threw his keys on the table. I paused, my hands trembling slightly as I placed the last fork down. "I don't understand, Marco. Why are you so angry with me? You were part of the setup, like furniture. Useful for a time, and now just taking up space," he retorted, opening the fridge and staring into it as if it held the answers to more than just his hunger. I stood there, silent, trying to process his harsh words. The room felt like it was closing in on me. Isabella and Matteo came in, their faces mirroring their father's disdain. Matteo grabbed a soda from the fridge, his eyes mocking. "Yeah, Laura, maybe you should just accept it. You're like an old couch we should have thrown out ages ago." Isabella laughed, a harsh sound that filled the room. "Seriously, Laura. Even you have to see it's true. You're just the leftovers now." Their cruelty sliced through any defense I had left. I turned away, hiding the tears that threatened to fall. "I've cared for you all, loved you. How can you treat me like this?" Marco shrugged, dismissing my emotions with a wave of his hand. "Love? That's a strong word for just doing your job, don't you think?" The rest of the dinner passed in silence, at least on my part. Their words echoed in my head: leftovers, useless, old furniture. It was clear they saw me as nothing more than a temporary help that had overstayed her welcome. Life has a way of knocking you down when you least expect it. Just when I thought things couldn't get worse, my health took a nosedive. My legs, which had always carried me through long days of teaching and bustling about the house, suddenly became a source of constant pain. The doctors couldn't give me a straight answer at first, tossing around terms like chronic inflammation and possible degenerative issues, which meant little more than "get used to it." This change hit me like a brick. Teaching at the private school, a job I cherished and excelled at, became impossible. I had to resign, leaving behind not just my income but a part of my identity. At home, every step was a struggle, every task a monumental effort. I felt trapped in my own body and, worse, in a home where I was increasingly unwelcome. Marco's reaction to my situation was like a cold splash of reality. One morning, after I had struggled to clear up the breakfast dishes, grimacing with every move, he walked into the kitchen. He watched me for a moment, his face twisted not with concern, but irritation. "Why are you even trying to clean? You're just making a mess," he said, his voice cold and sharp. "I'm trying to help out, Marco. It's not like I can just sit around," I replied, leaning against the counter for support. "Help? You call that help? You're more of a burden now than anything," he shot back, his words slicing through the air and cutting me deeper than the pain in my legs. Marco and the kids spent money like water, flaunting new gadgets and designer clothes bought with the inheritance. Me? I got nothing, not that I expected anything different at this point. Their lavish spending was a slap in the face, a constant reminder of where I stood in this family. On top of that, Marco and the kids loved to remind me that I was only in their house out of pity. "Don't push your luck, Laura," Marco would sneer. "Remember, you're just one argument away from being out on the street." Their words were like a cage, locking me in a life of quiet desperation. But one day, I stumbled upon a website for private tutors teaching languages online. My heart raced as I explored the possibility of teaching Italian again, reconnecting with a part of myself that I thought was lost forever. I dove into setting up my profile, my fingers trembling with excitement as I typed out my experience and qualifications. "Experienced Italian teacher, personalized and engaging lessons," I wrote. Before long, I was booking my first session. The thrill of teaching, of speaking Italian, of engaging with eager students, it all came rushing back, filling me with a warmth I hadn't felt in years. Each day, as Marco and the kids left, I transformed a corner of my room into a makeshift classroom. I started with a few students, but word of mouth spread fast. My schedule filled up, and I found myself teaching more and more. "You're really good at this, Laura," a student told me over a video call, their words bolstering my confidence. I started receiving glowing reviews, and my rates went up. As my reputation grew, so did my earnings. It was astounding. For the first time in a long time, I was making my own money, more money than Marco, even. But I kept this to myself. If Marco or his kids knew, they'd surely find a way to claim it or ruin this for me. One afternoon, after a particularly rewarding session, I sat back and let out a long, satisfied sigh. Just then, Marco walked in earlier than usual. He eyed my setup, a laptop, notebooks, Italian flags, and teaching aids scattered around. "What's all this?" he asked, his tone suspicious. "I'm teaching," I replied, my voice steady and calm, despite my racing heart. "Teaching? Here?" His confusion was evident. He hadn't expected this. "Who would want to learn from you?" "People from all over the world," I responded with a pride I couldn't hide. "Turns out, I'm quite popular." Marco scoffed, clearly unimpressed. "Make sure this doesn't interfere with your chores around the house." "It won't," I assured him, turning back to my computer. His presence in my sanctuary irked me, but he soon left, muttering under his breath. That night, I lay in bed, a smirk playing on my lips. Marco and his kids could spend all the inheritance they wanted on fleeting pleasures. Meanwhile, I was building something lasting, something just for me. My online teaching wasn't just a job, it was my lifeline, my escape plan. I was no longer just the downtrodden stepmother, I was Laura, the sought-after Italian tutor, a woman with a plan and a growing bank account. That night at dinner, there was a tension in the air so thick you could almost see it hanging above the table. Marco and the kids were unusually quiet as I served the food, their eyes avoiding mine. I could feel something brewing beneath the surface, but nothing prepared me for the words that were about to slice through the last threads of our family ties. Marco was the first to break the silence, his voice cold and detached. "I got a promotion at work," he announced, not looking at anyone in particular. "I bought a new house, too." I paused, spoon midair, the news catching me off guard. "That's great, congratulations," I managed to say, though a sinking feeling started to form in my stomach. "Yeah, well, don't get too excited," Marco continued, his eyes now fixed on me with a hardness I hadn't seen before. "You're not coming with us." I put the spoon down, feeling suddenly like I had been punched in the gut. "What do you mean?" "Just what I said," Marco snapped. "You're not part of the plan, Laura. You stay here. I'm moving with the kids. We need a fresh start." The room spun slightly as his words sunk in. Isabella giggled cruelly from across the table, her voice like a knife. "Yeah, who needs an old limping maid in a shiny new house?" Matteo chimed in with a smirk. "Consider yourself lucky we're not kicking you out on the street tonight." I looked from face to face, each one a mask of contempt and dismissal. My heart pounded painfully in my chest. "And the house? This house?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "It's sold," Marco said bluntly. "New owners will take over in a month. Maybe try to find a shelter or something by then." They all laughed, a harsh, grating sound that filled the room. I sat there, stunned, my hands trembling in my lap. This was their thanks, their repayment for all the years of care, of love, of sacrifice. As the laughter died down, I found my voice, small but steady. "I see. Well, then I guess there's nothing left to say, is there?" Marco shrugged, already disinterested as he turned his attention back to his plate. "Guess not." I stood up, my legs shaky but holding. I looked at each of them, their faces still turned towards their food, no sign of remorse or regret. "Enjoy your dinner," I said quietly, then turned and left the room. In my room, the gravity of the situation hit me full force. They were really going to leave me behind, discard me like an old piece of furniture. But as I sat there, a strange sense of relief began to wash over me. I was free, free from their cruelty, their disdain, their oppressive presence. It was not the freedom I had imagined or wanted, but it was freedom nonetheless. The day I left Marco and his children behind, I felt a strange mix of liberation and deep sadness. As I hauled my last suitcase to the door, Marco's bitter words followed me. "Hope you enjoy the Flophouses, because that's all you can afford," he jeered, with a cruel laugh that echoed off the empty walls. His kids, Isabella and Matteo, joined in with their own barbs. "Good riddance. Now we don't have to deal with your pathetic limping around the house." I didn't bother to reply. What was the point? I had learned long ago that words were useless against their kind of cruelty. I walked out, letting the door slam shut behind me, shutting off the chapter of my life that had brought me so much pain. Moving into the apartment I had rented in secret felt like the first true breath of fresh air in years. It was a modest place, but it was mine alone. Here, no shadows of disdain would loom over me. No harsh words would cut through the quiet. Setting up my new home was therapeutic. I arranged my books, set up my small desk by the window, the new headquarters for my online Italian lessons. I relished the peace, the utter silence that came not from tension but from tranquility. The divorce was finalized soon after. I stood in the courtroom, facing Marco and his children for the last time. They smirked, confident and unrepentant. When offered alimony, I refused. "I want nothing from him, not now, not ever," I declared. "He and his children are strangers to me." Word of my teaching spread, and my schedule became packed with students from all corners of the globe. The income was more than sufficient, a sweet victory that was all my own. One evening, while sipping tea at my new kitchen table, a call from an old friend brought unexpected news. "Have you heard about Marco?" she asked, a tone of disbelief in her voice. "He's moved into a fancy new house, but guess what? He's already blowing through money like there's no tomorrow." I couldn't help but grin, shaking my head. "No surprise there," I replied. "He never did plan for the future." Rumors about Marco and his children's reckless spending didn't surprise me, but it was the catalyst I needed to put my plan into action. During the last few tumultuous months of our marriage, I had recorded several of their verbal tirades and cruel jabs, originally for my own records, in case I ever needed proof of their behavior. I sent the files anonymously to Marco's boss. The company he worked for had a strict policy against any form of harassment, and I knew they would take it seriously. It wasn't long before the repercussions came to light. One evening, my phone rang with Marco's number. I hesitated, but curiosity got the better of me, and I answered. The desperation in his voice was palpable. "Laura, what have you done?" he blurted out, his voice a mix of anger and fear. "You've heard, then? Sounds like your company didn't appreciate the way you treat people," I said calmly, a hint of vindication coloring my words. "You've ruined me. They demoted me, slashed my salary. How am I supposed to pay the mortgage now? We could lose the house," he raged, his words tinged with panic. In the background, I could hear Isabella and Matteo, their voices loud and accusatory, blaming me, the same way they always had. "This is all your fault, Laura. You're going to pay for this." Matteo's voice cut through the phone. I couldn't help but laugh, a deep, genuine laugh that had been absent for far too long. "Now you might end up in a flophouse, isn't it ironic?" I said, the irony not lost on me. "Please, Laura, help us. We're sorry. We didn't mean any of it. We'll do anything," Marco pleaded, desperation making his voice crack. "You don't get it, Marco. I don't want your apologies or to help you. I'm done being your maid, your punching bag," I retorted sharply. "But we're family," he tried again, a last-ditch effort. "We were family," I corrected him coldly, feeling a surge of empowerment. "Goodbye, Marco." I hung up the phone, blocking his number along with Isabella's and Matteo's. I felt a weight lift off my shoulders, a closure I hadn't realized I needed. News reached me a few weeks later through mutual acquaintances that Marco and his children were indeed evicted after failing to make their mortgage payments. They had to downsize significantly, and the kids, now adults, had to find jobs to support themselves. The thought of them scrambling to make ends meet while I was contemplating buying my own house brought a smirk to my face. It wasn't just about revenge, it was about justice, about showing them that I was no longer the person they thought they could trample over. I turned my attention back to my computer, to a message from a student thanking me for my inspiring lessons. It warmed my heart. I had found my place, my purpose, and no one could take that away from me.
All right, everyone's presentations are done, Nick, the manager, said as he tried to move the discussion forward. Excuse me, I haven't. I recently found out something. Nick interrupted me and began to speak. There's apparently someone in this department who didn't graduate high school and is just a part-timer. Meetings should be for employees only. Absolutely right. His lackey, Mike, of course, agreed with Nick. I'm leaving. After leaving the meeting room, I started to shut down my computer. I noticed that an email had arrived, not in my personal inbox, but in the company's shared email. Thinking, there's no point in speaking up, no one will listen, I went home quietly. The next day, I heard a commotion from Nick's desk. He was staring at his computer screen, his face pale. Nick? Is something wrong? Mike looked at the screen with him. And he turned even paler than Nick. Why is he so angry? Knowing the reason for Mike's distress, I thought to myself, serves them right. My name is Adam. My mother passed away when I was in the 9th grade, and I was raised by my father. Well, you could hardly call it being raised. After my mother passed, my father changed. He drowned his sorrows in alcohol, and though he still went to work, he squandered our living expenses on horse racing. Because of that, I had to start working part-time as soon as I entered high school. Every month, I went to the convenience store with bills in hand that couldn't be auto-deducted from my father's account. Even though I endured it because I didn't want to be alone, I reached my limit in my second year of high school and dropped out. I found a live-in job at a distant inn. Thank you for everything. The day I left home, my father, still staring at the TV, spoke. Take care. That was our last conversation. Back then, 18 wasn't the age of majority, so I needed my father's permission to work, and I couldn't hide my place of employment. Yet, my father never visited me even once. I kept working just to survive, and before I knew it, I was 42. Years of hard work paid off, and I was transferred to the headquarters. I was thrilled to be recognized by the company, as I thought I'd be working in the field until retirement due to my lack of formal education. Listen up. Our work can change the future of our employees. Don't drag us down. On my first day after the transfer, Nick, dressed in an expensive suit, spoke sternly. There was a reason for this. Our inn was located in a prominent tourist destination, known so well that everyone in the state could sing its commercial jingle. At its peak, we had 5 locations within the state. But that was long ago. Due to financial difficulties and aging facilities, only the place where I had worked for many years and the original establishment remained. I was prepared to lose my job anytime, but now there was a glimmer of hope. With the rise of social media, the tourist area where the inn was located started gaining attention again. Depending on how hard the sales department, where I was transferred, worked, we could either thrive or be forced to give up this prime location to the new hotel chains continuously popping up. For Nick, who had switched careers from another industry to strengthen our sales, this was a battle he couldn't afford to lose. I understood why he had to be strict. I will do my best. Nick sneered at my enthusiastic declaration. Did you not hear what I said? I'm sorry. I thought I was listening carefully. Out of habit from years of customer service, I apologized reflexively, though I had no idea what had offended him. Someone was watching me with a smirk. In this department, there are those who are expected to excel and those who have been shoved here because they have nowhere else to go. You are the latter. It was Mike, the section chief. He's 7 years younger, at 35. But he was called to headquarters much earlier than I was and had been moving around within the headquarters ever since. I'm not jealous, but I can't accept that he's my boss. Graduating from a prestigious university, he has an unusually high pride and caused many problems as a newbie, making things very difficult for me when I was the front desk leader. When I found out Mike was transferred to the sales department a month before me, I was disheartened. Mike is right. With just a middle school diploma, there's not much you can do. Don't even think about achieving results. As if I didn't exist, Nick remarked, I'm thirsty. Mike eagerly ran to the coffee maker. It seems Mike is Nick's lackey. I regretted being happy about my transfer to headquarters, wishing I had stayed on site forever. Send a direct mail to every company on this list by the end of the day. Nick only assigned me tasks that even a new graduate could handle. What? There are over 1,000 companies. You want me to send to all of them by today? Yes, if you and your fellow misfits split the work, even those with nowhere else to go should finish by today. I glanced at the employees typing away expressionlessly. They were worn out from customer service, only thinking about leaving on time, or were women reassigned after having children. With zero motivation for work. Even Sam, a new graduate from the same university as Mike, who was supposed to be among the expected achievers, had no enthusiasm for the job. Having joined the company wanting to do customer service. I don't care what they say, I plan to quit any time, he said. Only Nick and Mike were highly motivated, making all the decisions between the two of them. I originally only wanted to work at the inn to survive and had no particular attachment to this job. I swallowed my words, thinking I had no right to reprimand them. About a month after the transfer, Nick told us with a frustrated look. To commemorate the 50th anniversary, we've decided to create a plan exclusive for one group per day. Originally, Mike and I were supposed to come up with it, but our president, Mr. Thompson, insists on hearing everyone's opinions. So, you all get a chance. As Nick explained, Mike began handing out prints. Make sure not to embarrass Nick. If your ideas are half-baked, you'll have to redo them. It seemed that they had printed his handwritten notes by Mr. Thompson, which included several questions and a section for free responses. It made sense why Nick had to seek our input, given that all responses had to be submitted to Mr. Thompson. We were given a week to think about it, and a meeting was scheduled to compile our ideas. My plan is to let guests enjoy both the old and modern America. Nick began the presentations. Guests would watch a master confectioner at a nearby traditional sweet shop make sweets in front of them. The welcome drink would be premium tea in a bottle. Nick's plan was certainly attractive. After his presentation, Nick called on us to present in the order we were seated. Just as I stood up for my turn. All right, everyone's presentations are done. Excuse me, I haven't. I recently found out something. Nick interrupted me. There's someone in this department who didn't graduate high school and is just a part-timer. He was likely talking about me. I joined the company as a part-timer and was made a full-time employee when I turned 20. That was 20 years ago, so Nick and Mike probably had no chance to know until recently. Meetings should be for employees only. Absolutely right. After that, Nick kept creating opportunities to solicit everyone's opinions, purposefully excluding me from speaking. The meeting unexpectedly heated up and went past the scheduled end time. A few people asked to leave, and the discussion continued with the remaining few. Still here? Normally, you'd leave in that situation. Though I had no attachment to the job initially, hearing kind words from customers made me want to make them happier. For someone like me, with nowhere to go, the inn was my home and customer service was my life. I felt pathetic about my current self. I'm leaving. I left the conference room and started shutting down my computer. I noticed an email had arrived, not in my personal inbox, but in the company's shared email. Thinking no one would listen to what I had to say anyway, I quietly went home. The next day, while preparing the DM as instructed, I heard a commotion from Nick's desk. In his haste to stand up, he hit his knee on the desk. He stared at his computer screen, his face pale. Nick! What's wrong? Mike, thinking he should be the first to rush over, approached Nick while still wearing his coat. He peered at the screen with Nick. And he turned even paler than Nick. Why is he so angry? Who is responsible for this company? Nick, more irritated than ever, asked, and Mike answered without checking. Probably Sam. Sam wasn't there because he was attending a morning training session for new hires. Nick gave up on getting angry and returned his gaze to the screen. They were looking at an email that arrived right after the end of the working day yesterday. Apparently, no one, including me, had checked it before leaving. The email was from a large company that used us for their annual employee trips. The president and executives of that company also frequently used our services personally. President of the company, Mr. Mason himself, had declared that neither he nor his company would ever use our services again. Well, some companies cancel their employee trips or stop using our services due to financial struggles. Let's just move on. Mike kept wiping the sweat from his forehead with a handkerchief. Knowing why Mike was so agitated, I quietly watched their interaction. Do you know how much revenue we get from that company? We can find other guests to fill the rooms, but we'll lose the banquet costs, gift shop revenue, rental car fees, and more. Moreover, the gifts were supposed to be prepared by the traditional confectionery shop involved in Nick's proposed plan. If it's known that we incurred such a huge loss at this critical time, Nick's position in the company would be jeopardized. Nick took a deep breath, seemingly trying to calm himself. All right, Mike. Go to New York right now and apologize to Mr. Mason. What? You're coming with me, right? I have urgent work to do. I trust you, which is why I'm entrusting this to you. Please. Mike, believing Nick's sincerity, agreed with a determined look on his face, saying, yes. That's Nick for you. Even if Mike went to apologize, Nick would shift all the blame onto him if the client didn't change their mind. Well, it was Mike's fault to begin with, so it served him right. About 3 hours later, Sam answered a call from somewhere and repeatedly apologized, saying, I'm very sorry. Everyone watched to see what was happening. After ending the call, he informed Nick with a weary tone. When Mike arrived at the client's company, he only made things worse, further infuriating Mr. Mason. He was demanding, get his boss here immediately. It was no wonder Sam was exhausted, dealing with such a call right after returning from training. What is that idiot doing? All right, Adam, you're coming with me. If sacrificing Mike didn't work, then I must be next. Normally, I'd want to refuse at all costs, but I saw an opportunity in this situation. If I can be of assistance, I'd be happy to join you. I obediently followed Nick, and we flew to New York. When we introduced ourselves at the reception, it became clear how serious the situation was, as the receptionist personally escorted us to the president's office. Angry voices leaked through the door, making both Nick and me uneasy. Excuse me. I'm Nick, the supervisor. I understand my subordinate has caused you trouble, and I deeply apologize. Nick, with his experience in the corporate world, knew enough to offer an apology before excuses. However, his customer service skills left much to be desired. I sighed as I saw Mike trembling like a small dog in the corner of the room. What kind of training are you giving your subordinates? Mr. Mason glared at Nick with a red face. The intensity of his gaze made even Nick take a step back. Regrettably, I joined this company only 2 years ago and was unaware of Mike's issues. I should have identified his shortcomings sooner. Indeed. I should have realized sooner. No sensible person would come to apologize and then give a lengthy presentation on the drawbacks of not using their in. Nick froze, his mouth slightly open. Suspecting the worst, I picked up the documents that had fallen to the floor. It seemed Mike hastily prepared these documents on the plane, listing the disadvantages. Disadvantage 1: if you change the venue for the company trip, employees might suspect it's for cost-cutting reasons, leading to a negative impression. Reading it aloud half-jokingly, Nick snatched the papers from my hand and checked the contents with a furious expression. Among the stack of documents was a receipt from a nearby convenience store's copy machine. I felt a pang of dread, hoping he hadn't shown the receipt as well. What do you think he said when I asked what kind of nerve he had to do this? I'm very sorry. Faced with the dire situation, Nick must have thought there was nothing left to do but apologize. In a voice smaller than I'd ever heard from him, he uttered words of apology. He said, I'm a Harvard graduate. I don't believe I said anything wrong. Mike, what have you done? Forgetting his plan to pin the blame on Mike, Nick yelled loudly, even in front of Mr. Mason. I didn't do anything wrong. You're still saying that? Look at him. Mike pointed at me with a shaking hand. I was assigned to headquarters in my 20s and now I'm a section chief. This guy only made it to headquarters at 42. Everything I've done proves I was right. So why are we losing the contract? Having said his piece, Mike collapsed to the floor. Of course. You were sent there because you had nowhere else to go. Mike never expected to hear such words from someone he looked down upon. He lunged at me, and Nick hurriedly stepped in to stop him. Mr. Thompson told me Mike is a quick thinker, and to take good care of him. There's no way he was pushed aside. Don't make things worse here. He didn't say quick thinker, he said only quick-witted, didn't he? I don't remember that part. I recalled the many troubles Mike caused when he was a newbie. When Mike was on the front line, his pride was so high that he never apologized to customers. Customer service, especially in our job, doesn't work alone. It brings both good and bad situations. If the front staff or housekeepers made mistakes, or the cleaning company didn't properly clean a room, one had to apologize to the customers regardless of personal fault. Mike, in such situations, would never apologize, insisting he wasn't at fault. This often angered customers, and as the front desk leader, I frequently had to apologize on his behalf. He caused complaints and disrupted operations, which is why he was quickly moved to headquarters. In departments where he didn't interact directly with customers, his quick thinking was beneficial and things went well. But it seemed his flaws were starting to show. Corporate reservations are supposed to be entered into the system by the sales representative. But a quick check yesterday revealed that more than 10 items were missing from the client's reservation. The handover document clearly stated what needed to be prepared. Why didn't you enter it into the system? Why do we have to give them special treatment? Filling rooms near the banquet hall, setting up all the food in advance. Specifying the brand of wine, they're too demanding. No wonder he always angered customers, I thought, feeling a headache coming on. Grouping them in rooms near the banquet hall is for our benefit too. It makes it easier for the staff to set up beds and serve breakfast since everyone's schedule is synchronized. As for the other requests, Mr. Mason suggested them to lighten our load. I didn't know that. Nick finally seemed to realize that Mike was the one who had angered the client. What did you say to them? I just told them we wouldn't give them special treatment anymore. We shouldn't waste effort on things that don't bring in money. I was utterly exasperated at his lack of understanding of customer service. Of course, we shouldn't comply with unreasonable demands. But carrying over successful practices from past stays makes customers feel remembered and enhances their experience. Good memories encourage repeat visits. That's part of our job. I looked down at Mike, who was sitting on the floor. In our job, nothing is a waste. Mr. Thompson likely moved you to the sales department, hoping you'd finally understand this. How do you think he feels now that you've failed to meet his expectations? Mike, tears in his eyes, fled the president's office. I was amazed he still hadn't apologized. You have it tough, Adam. It's okay, we're all employees of the same company. I deeply apologize for this disrespectful incident. Especially after all the care you've shown us. If it weren't for you, Adam, I really would have stopped staying here. When I heard you were moving to the sales department, I was willing to reconsider if you handled it. Seeing us talk so amicably, Nick's face contorted. Do you two know each other? Adam's service is excellent. I always requested him specifically. Normally, we don't accept specific staff requests, but we made an exception for Mr. Mason, adjusting my shifts accordingly. He had personally stayed at our hotel just before my transfer, and during casual conversation, I mentioned, I'm moving to the sales department soon. If I hadn't told him then, things could have been much worse. Please continue to take care of us. I look forward to it. On the return flight, Nick awkwardly offered me a can of beer. It's still working hours. Of course, I had no intention of forgiving him for a single beer. Nick might try to pin everything on Mike and avoid any consequences. While pondering this, a startling fact came to light. Nick, the tea bottles for the plan have arrived. I handed Nick a bottle labeled with our inn's name. They look good. What are you talking about? These are plastic bottles. I had assumed we would use the trendy, high-end bottling tea. But what arrived were ordinary plastic bottles of tea with customized labels. The only unique aspect was the label, which had the inn's name, making it look customized. Upon further investigation, I discovered that a substantial amount of money was set to be paid to the tea company. It was priced like bottling tea. Does this plastic bottle really cost $100 each? The tea inside is specially blended for us. The extra cost is for that. Wouldn't it be better to use another tea company? Or is there a specific reason we must use this one? As Nick continued to make excuses, I showed him a printed email. I informed the tea company's president, Mr. Mitchell, that we discovered irregular payments and he confessed. He said you two were high school classmates and planned to split the extra money. That idiot. Why did he confess? That's not important. You should worry about yourself, this could turn into a police matter. Opening the bottle cap, I suggested. How about calming down with this tea? It supposedly has a relaxing effect. Nick drank the tea frantically. In the following days, decisions were made about their fates. Mike was reassigned to the General Affairs Department, with no chance of transfer or promotion, as per Mr. Thompson's orders. As for Nick, since the payment to the tea company hadn't yet been made, he narrowly avoided legal trouble. Instead, he was encouraged to leave the company, and to avoid further complications, Nick submitted his resignation. Rumor has it that connections between HR departments have made it difficult for him to find new employment. Even though it was good to have those two gone, something unexpected happened in the sales department. Everyone became motivated and united in refining the 50th anniversary plan. In the end, my plan was adopted. We collaborated with the Tourist Information Center to provide personalized guides. The plan, tailored to the number of guests, was truly special for the 50th anniversary. Hey, is Adam's family coming to stay? I immediately booked that special plan for my family. Sam noticed it on the reservation list and quickly picked up on it. Yes, I'm inviting my father. That's great. I might invite my parents too. I lacked the courage to face my father just as Adam. But here, with the confidence Mr. Mason praised, I felt ready. The 50th anniversary plan was a perfect opportunity to reconnect with my father. I hoped to bring back the days when we could laugh together as we once did.